Okay, hey Rob, how's it going?
Hey David, I'm well. How you doing, mate? All right?
Doing good, mate. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Bangkok Thought Leaders Quarantine Edition.
Pleasure.
So I think anybody watching this who is part of the Bangkok business community will know you very well, as you're a mainstay of so many events around the city. But for those who don't, Rob Hall
Will they
is...
recognize the grey? I don't know. That's the question, the lockdown grey. Let's see.
I'm feeling the same, mate. Don't worry. So Rob is a true Bangkok thought leader. He is someone that I am inspired by constantly. He is a leader in the world of marketing, especially when it comes to encouraging brands to embrace their humanity and shift towards prioritizing the broader customer experience. So moving from the product towards the customer experience. Does that capture
Yeah,
it, Rob?
pretty much. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm very excited for this conversation because I think we share many similar philosophies on how brands should be communicating and storytelling. So looking forward to this. Before we get into all of that, COVID-19 is, to give this a timeline, we're in June now. So we're over the worst of it in Thailand, certainly. A lot is being spoken about now in terms of the permanence of work from home or changes to society that are going to make everything brand new. How do you feel about that? How do you think that COVID-19 is going to create a more long-term effect on both marketing and the business world?
It's the $1 million question at the moment, right? Look, I think that I kind of see two answers being talked about on this at the moment, and I think I'm somewhere in between. One is that everything's going to change, right? And you'll hear it in the marketing press and in the trades and the podcasts that we listen to. I was listening to one yesterday when it was like the girl was on talking about cloud computing, how it's going to change everything. I mean, the problem with the everything is going to change is one, change doesn't just happen because we want it to change, or the change that we want isn't always going to happen, right? And that's the credibility issue with talking. Everyone wants the change that they want, and it doesn't happen like that. And look, I think the other thing is the change that we often talk about is it long term? Is it underlying change, or is it just that we're using Zoom and TikTok more? And is that a big change, right? Maybe not. We know as marketers that underlying values and people's viewpoints is very hard to change. Yeah, advertising works by changing behavior, but by reinforcing values and viewpoints. So look, there is that everything's going to change now, and it needs to be undercut a little bit and saying, hang on, is that true? On the other hand, we do, there's the other viewpoint where it's, nothing's going to change. Human beings don't change their behavior, values don't change. Things are going to snap back. There's no new normal. It's just going to go back to how it was. And I think that misses the point as well. I think that, we're in marketing, right? And marketing, markets change, innovation, product change happen. The things that people like change over time, which is why we're in this game. Brands take time though, and change does take time. But I think there are moments, there are crises which actually accelerate change. So I think what I hear, what I listen to is this is the time for acceleration of things that have been on the surface for a while, but are now being able to kickstart those things.
Absolutely.
And that can happen in a whole lot of different ways. I'm in Australia right now and coming back to Bangkok very shortly, but it's been through 3 months of bushfires before the COVID-19 hit. And the impact of those environmental changes, which came on the back of flood and a lot of environmental change, really has started to change the way that brands and products are thinking about sustainability. And, that's been a massive thing here, but that really sometimes takes a crisis or some major event to really kickstart things that are lying around to accelerate them and make them happen.
Yeah, I think that's
particularly when there's outside change that we really can't control. I was speaking to an ex-Thai client who's an auto client in Bangkok, and because of the pollution problems that have been in Bangkok for about the last 6 months, they get about 300% increase in inquiries on electric cars and non-emission cars, because it's really hard to separate your direct product experience with the impact that you're having on the environment when it's every time you go to drop the kids off at school, you have to wear a mask.
Yeah, it's right in your
I
face,
think,
literally.
those who are saying, hey, things are just going to snap back, they're missing out on the fact that the underlying conditions in society and the market will change. It will force change in consumer behavior. And that's going to be accelerated now.
I think the headlines of all or nothing, they're very symptomatic of the era that we live in. It's hyperbole, right? Nothing's ever nuanced or in the middle. It's always the worst of everything or the best of everything.
Yes.
I think what the position that you're taking on this is the sensible position. It's evolution, not revolution. Things are gonna change, but it's not gonna be all upside down. For us at Lexicon.
No. But it isn't just hey, we're all selling online now, or we need to automate everything, or now it's just work from home. There are fundamental underlying changes that have been happening for some time that now are given the accelerator. So I think it's really interesting to see those things happen. And
I'm managing a live case study. Like we're a relatively small business navigating through this scenario, and what you're describing is exactly what we have been through. So we were already looking to improve how we record data and measure productivity and profitability and all these things. But these are actually liberating, as serious as they may sound, these are actually things that are going to liberate the employees. Digital transformation, which was already a buzzword that people were talking about, but not necessarily living. The fact that we've had to go remote, we need more data than ever. We need to understand how everything fits together. We need better process. We need better structure. We need better strategy. So from our perspective of people in this industry, it's creating better best practice out of this.
It forces you to, these conditions force us to. Now, some of those will be long-term and some of those won't, and that's okay. And look, I think digital transformation is really important, often not the starting point though.
Sure.
So to give you an example, so I'm working with a butcher, and it's been a leading butcher in the market for 50 years. And they came to us saying, hey, look, we need an online shop. Delivery is more important than ever during COVID and beyond. But actually, with all the other changes that are happening, it was a chance for reevaluation of the business and to talk about business transformation. That is, who is your customer moving forward? Okay. There are so many changes in health requirements and the way people are changing their diet and what they're cooking at home, that it starts to be, maybe there's a different customer segment that you can add. Maybe the product range and the type of meat, whether it's grass-fed or organic, is going to change. Maybe the supply chain of where you're getting that meat needs to change and evolve because people are interested in farm to table. So maybe how you're sourcing and again, then how you're selling online, and then how you're managing the distribution and delivery and the customer experience. So I think this is an opportunity to look beyond, to start with a reevaluation of the actual business, and then really look at what are the digital tools that are going to help me get there.
Yeah, so I think we're going to talk about brands in a bit more detail later on, and I think coming back to that butcher example is a great one. We presented at an OzCham event a couple of years back. I think it was around the time of the Facebook data breach, and we got together and speculated on what could be the next step. It's always stuck with me, something that you said at that time, because it was very, very, very insightful. And there were 2 points to it. One was that you were saying the Facebook model isn't sustainable for too long because of the data type breaches, and that companies needed to prioritize owning the customer journey more, owning the customer experience more by getting more access to who they're actually speaking to, email addresses, contact information, so that if Facebook's not allowed to, if Facebook suddenly stops existing, all of a sudden you've lost your whole business because you don't have the proprietary data for yourself. And the second was that you thought that a model that could evolve is one in which there is more of an incentive to share. So with Facebook, we're the product. We're being sold to, but they're essentially selling us to somebody else. You mentioned at the time a model that was kind of modeled on WeChat, but a different thing in which people would perhaps receive advertising in exchange for some kind of credits. That was a couple of years ago. Have the couple of years that have passed changed your perspective, or has COVID changed your perspective on that trajectory?
Look, things haven't changed much in 2 years, as much as I would like to see, and more importantly, as much as, so this links in a little bit with my view on brands. Okay, so I think that there is a human-centric brand in developed Western economies where basically what we're saying, the direct experience is really important. So it has to be a great product and great service, but it also needs to take into account my individual rights around privacy on data. It needs to take into account how you're treating your staff and your supply chain, and are you contributing towards the community? And then are you a brand that's really interested in the environment and your impact that you're having there as well? So a human-centric brand is a bigger customer experience rather than yum, does it taste good, okay? With technology platforms, you know, I view them as being very efficient and effective platforms at doing what they're doing. They're advertising platforms that trade on data, okay? And they're brilliant at it. And they are so good at it that they virtually become monopolies. So it's really hard to create another Facebook or another Instagram or another YouTube. And a couple of things are happening. I think that one is that people and users are using more intimate storytelling places such as TikTok, at Snapchat, and also, you know, closed walled gardens like WhatsApp and WeChat to be able to share more intimately in a less public space, which are not so dominated by news and advertising and everything else. And brands within that are really caught in this, we're caught in this bind where, you know, they need to use Facebook and Google and spend 70 or 80% of their marketing budgets to reach people, but they do see people migrating and they want to create this one-on-one relationship with customers and own that data and own that relationship. I still see a platform where people are rewarded for their data and are actually given access to their data and actually are in control of how their data is being used. But it's really hard in the current environment for those sort of platforms to arise. So I see the biggest change is actually that human-centric brands, with the P&Gs, the Unilevers, the Salesforces of the world, are human-centric brands working with these efficiency-led, customer-centric technology brands. They're going to try and force them to change, and they're either going to have to change through the force of these other brands, or they're going to have to change through regulation. And this is going to be an interesting thing to look at over the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, I think it would be an interesting thing for the layman out there to unpack a little bit what human-centric branding involves.
Okay. So basically what human-centric brands do is they balance, you know, really innovative, efficient, better, faster, cheaper, great products with a bigger idea around what people actually are starting to choose in their buying experience. So yeah, it needs to work. It needs to be great. It needs to be good. That's hygiene, okay? But the more indirect consumer experience starts to come into play. So how you treat my data, whether you track me, whether you give me freedom of speech, whether you allow me to actually manage and control my own data starts to come into play. how you pay your own staff, how you treat your supply chain so you don't have, slavery actually producing your products somewhere in the world, whether you pay your tax as a company or how you treat the local community comes into my decision. How you treat the planet. Are you a circular company? Are you actually, interested in where you'll source your products, how much waste you produce? All of these factors are starting to come into play because the buying and using experience is exploding with the impact that we're seeing all around us. So a human-centric brand is saying, hey, this is in what I would call balanced democracies and balanced capitalist countries, these decisions are going to decide in the medium to long term whether I buy you or not, just as much as whether you taste good and whether you work. Okay? So I think that's the definition of human-centric brand. And it is an airy-fairy. It's not, oh, look, it's really about whether I say I care about the world and the environment. Do you deliver on all of these things in my buying and using experience? So it becomes really, really important. But I also think it's important, David, to recognize and understand that in some places, and I've already talked about technology brands, in some places and some countries, the customer-centric model where it's just a really efficient technology-led product that delivers a great direct customer experience. In other words, it works and I get serviced really well, will also in the short term thrive. They'll also do well. The question is whether in the medium to long term, the sacrifice you make in terms of your own individual rights and freedoms, the impact on the community and on the planet, whether the costs of using that sort of brand, how that plays out, that becomes really, really interesting. Because there's consumers in China that may not have the choice about, they'll be able to buy a customer-centric brand and they'll deliver, and those brands will do really well.
So it's a lot deeper than just marketing then. It's the core DNA and essence of the company at every level. The marketing is the tip of a huge iceberg in that case, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a challenge as marketers. How do we create an integrated experience? And you wrote it about it the other day. At every touch point, how do I make sure that's a really good experience that aligns with my choices on how I now choose you? Are you a brand that actually stands for equality? Okay. And how does that play out? Do you actually hire on that basis? Does your board of directors consist of different types of people? Sustainability. Where do you source your product? How do you make it? What happens to it after it's used? All of these questions start to be experiential questions as opposed to what I'm just talking about.
So one of the challenges that I think businesses face that totally connects to what we're describing here in terms of brand. So you have multinational companies operating in different regions.
Yep.
And even with a solid strategy where they have a clear description that everyone can understand of their values, their mission, their passions, what they stand for, how do you ensure consistent execution when it comes to the marketing element of that? We spoke about an example of the butcher earlier. Like, I guess it's a small operation, so the marketing team is always going to be there. But what happens if that marketing team leaves and another team comes in? How do you ensure the consistency of the core of the brand over time?
Look, it's often the global. We've both had global clients, right? And it's always that there is and has always been that challenge. Of how do you ensure brand consistency with a local voice? And that there, we could spend a long time talking about that, and I won't go into the brand management sides of global versus local. But I think there's a couple of things to say. One is the brand itself and wherever that brand is managed globally needs to be very clear on what all the different experiences that they expect. And that does need to be consistent. And then, of course, allowing for the local flavor. But the second point is that brands, human-centric brands will do well and not do well in different markets. that's the truth, is that it's going to be really interesting. You take Chinese brands, which a lot of them I would classify as being very customer centric, very technology savvy, very efficient, very effective, but often using AI and facial recognition and data policies that will have trouble, like Huawei in Western markets. How are they going to adapt and change? Because they can't change their communication. They actually need to actually deliver on all those experiences. And it's going to be very easy to see whether they do or they don't. How are they going to adapt? And look at, Facebook and YouTube and those technology companies, which are Western brands and also very customer centric, efficiency led. How are they going to adapt? And we've seen it played out with Twitter and Facebook in the last couple of weeks. How are they going to adapt and change to a model where I love Facebook and I use it all the time, but I'm potentially not going to use it anymore because I don't like the impact that you have on society or privacy or fake news? Or P&G says to Facebook, I don't have a choice to use you as an advertising platform, but you need to change because my brand is not safe in the environment that you're creating. How are you going to change? I think that's the really interesting question. There will always be global brand, local issues in terms of staffing and managing the consistency. And of course, communication, I'm a great believer that communication should be local, even for a global brand, so that the nuance of the brand can be interpreted, and that should happen. But I think where the rubber hits the road is where a brand's philosophies and values are in a place where those are challenged, and whether they change to adapt or they don't. And to me, that's the battleground for the next 10 years. Is the two types of societies, the sort of competent command and control, and the customer-centric brands, and then the human-centric and sort of more balanced democracies, and how do they work with each other or not?
You mentioned the nuances there, and I think there's a lot in nuance, because I see strategy as a haiku in the terms that you've got limitations, you've got restrictions, but within those, as long as you stay within those lines, you have unlimited freedom. You can do whatever you want. I find that to be exhilarating. I much prefer that to a blank piece of paper.
Look, I totally agree with you. And brands, it waxes and wanes between how much limits or how much freedom they allow you. But I think the really smart global brands will really allow for flexibility around, not around their core values and what they stand for and the human-centric values that they believe in and the experiences they expect to be delivered. Because we're reaching a place in the globe where, becomes a global standard in how you deliver on experience. But just allowing for local nuance, allowing for, the local way that any brand is interpreted to have some sort of flexibility. It's massively important.
We were speaking earlier before this conversation started about some of the dangers that companies face when they're executing, because a brand has to remain contemporary, even though society is constantly changing. And that means legacy brands often struggle to participate, and new upstarts can eat their lunch. And we mentioned the ideas of greenwashing and woke-washing. And I think Gillette is a really interesting example from a couple of years ago. I think we both agreed that the underpinning strategy was solid, that they want to modernize their brand, they want to tap into the zeitgeist, and they want to show that they have a social conscience. All of those ideas are great, and I have a million ideas on how you could execute those ideas, but the actual execution of it had the opposite effect, right?
Yeah, I mean, some people loved it, some people hated it. I hated it, but as we talked about, the underlying idea and the strategy of where they're trying to go, I think is a good one. And not just because it's, that's a popular movement or trend we want to get behind, that doesn't mean anything for a brand. Their brand is the best a man can get.
Mm.
So how do you evolve that brand DNA, which is their brand truth, and make that work as times are changing and moving on?
Mm.
So that idea that we encourage men to be a certain way, and we take a stand that we think that's important, equality is important, and how you treat women and how men treat each other is, I think, is a good space for them, because that's the brand space that they own. They're not trying to be something they're not.
Mm.
The execution, though, felt to me, and we talked about it, it felt like some sort of guilt trip where we're just trying to make certain men feel bad about doing some things. That is never going to change views. That's going to reinforce stereotypes. And I think that was the problem with the execution, around reinforcing existing stereotypes instead of moving the conversation on to, hey, let's respect a certain way of being. So
I think it's unfortunate for them that a company that does a great job of brand storytelling is Dollar Shave Club, who's their upstart competitor. Like, really good content on brand. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's relatable. It's kind of stuff you'd want to share, even if you have a beard.
Look,
you're not shaving.
Yeah, it's fun. I think, allowing for, and maybe the Jetler one was so serious and so kind of, trying to be, there wasn't any room for play or anything else in there. Dollar Shave Club is great, but of course, when you're an upstart and you've got a different business model and that's your message, that really helps, right? But as a brand develops and it needs to create an emotional space rather than just a practical innovation space, that's when the challenge around branding becomes really important. And so many brands are going to be looking at the changes that are going on, what's going on in the US at the moment, what's going on globally in terms of equality, what's going on in terms of sustainability, what's going on in terms of COVID's brought up equity, who are the essential services and how are we treating our teachers, our doctors, our nurses, our emergency services. All of these questions are going to be thrown up, and then a brand needs to identify, what do we stand for, what's our brand DNA, and how do we create an emotional brand around that.
This is a really good, even though it's one vignette of an example, I think it's a great lesson for anyone wanting to understand how brands work. You have to think of a brand as a person. It has an identity, it has a personality.
Yes, has a point of view.
Yeah, when I imagine Gillette, it's, I don't know, it's you or I perhaps. It's a certain kind of, a little bit older, but trustworthy, solid. The danger was that the persona that they were speaking as is not at all who we know their brand to be. So it comes across as inauthentic. They're tapping into the wrong crowd. It's a failure of audience insight. It's a failure of voice. It's a failure of strategy. We've
talked about this tone of voice of a brand is so important, to actually find the tone that is you, that's right for you, that doesn't speak down to people, that doesn't lecture people. And to me, they got that completely wrong. But it doesn't mean the space that they're trying to identify is wrong.
Sure, absolutely.
And this is the challenge on execution, which is really important.
Yeah, I think for anybody watching this, the key lesson from this part of the conversation is the need to do the hard work of figuring that stuff out, because you can't be human-centric, you can't engage, you can't tell a good story unless you actually know the story that you want to tell. Like, who are you? And it's it's more important than ever to be authentic in that.
It's very important, David, and it's also very important for the brand itself and not the agency to be the one that's creating it. And I think a lot of problems with Gillette and these other is that an agency will also always come in with a viewpoint on how it should be. If you don't have a clear idea of who you are and what your voice is and what you stand for, it's going to be interpreted in 10 different ways. So you've got to own that. Agencies are there to help bring that to life. And of course they can create that for you if you don't know what that is, but that's a mistake. You need to own what your brand is, what it stands for, what tone of voice it is, what you believe. Your point of view should be owned by you, not by someone else.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you have a schizophrenic brand that has a different voice every month and it's different, looks different every month. The point of modern marketing is tribal. It's building a tribe, building a community around what you do. And you do that by understanding them, and you don't need to appeal to the whole world. Just pick a group or a couple of groups, be your thing to them. Sounds so easy.
Now, but and it doesn't mean that it's just one global ad and it works in every market. It's like we said before, you can then interpret that in different markets in different ways and dial things up and dial things down. You can play with it then, but you should start off at a pretty consistent place.
I just had an idea that's completely off topic here, but do you know the book Seven? I think it's called Seven Basic Plots. It basically says that certainly all of Western literature is based on seven core plots that are how we see the world. It's overcoming the monster, it's the journey, it's all that kind of stuff. I wonder how applicable that is globally. Like, I've never done the research. Maybe that's a good research. Maybe I'll do a PhD in that.
Whether the hero's journey works in every market is an interesting one, right?
Yeah, is there a different cosmology at work in this part of the world that that's okay. So I'm just giving myself a task here.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, I think a lot of the advertising that happens in Thailand, particularly the brand stuff in the last few years, have actually been less about product and brand and more about the moral fiber of how they would like Thailand to be.
The insurance adverts and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not wrong. But I think a lot of these brands which have strong value systems, and maybe they see a lack of that storytelling and a lack of that leadership coming from other places. And they really want to put out that philosophy out there and try and reconfirm the values of a society when the messages aren't coming from elsewhere. And I think that also has a strong, we know that brand building is emotional storytelling. That's how you achieve long-term brand availability when it comes to consumers. And even though a lot of that advertising, you could swap brands and it could be an insurance company or a bank or a shopping company, it's still really important to try and maintain a sort of a value system that these brands think are important.
Yeah, those adverts are they're tearjerkers. They're really well produced. It's great storytelling. But it's a good point about the branding of those videos, because usually it's a 10-minute video and it has a couple of seconds at the end that says sponsored by AIA or whatever it is. Do you think, I guess the ROI might be there's probably not a measurable ROI, but it's sentiment, right? It's
if I'm really honest with you, I think they do a lot of other marketing, which is quite effective. I think a lot of those ads, the leadership of those companies don't really care. They care on getting that public message out there. That is actually their driving force. I used to do a lecture with a bunch of students, and I'll probably do it in my upcoming lecture series, where I used to show 5 of those ads and ask people whether they loved them, and they all loved them, and then tell us which brand they were. And there's like 2 to 3% could actually say which brand it was. But that actually isn't the point. A lot of those ads are actually just trying to get a moral narrative out there that those business owners believe in, which is actually great. It's really lovely that they have that. You can argue against the branding of it. I don't think you can argue against the idea that they're trying to provide a sort of a compass for society.
I just had a thought on that previous topic, the 7 plots concept. One of them is rags to riches, and I can only really think of one of those Thai adverts now, and it fits into that one. The one where the boy steals the medicine and the chemist catches him and becomes the doctor at the end.
That's great. But I mean, I would hate to see that sort of advertising go away, because it's a real strength. It's a real strength. And it's incredibly important that this big emotional storytelling is done by brands. I think they are getting better at linking it back to the proposition of the brand and the purpose. But I'd hate to see that go away because it's really, really strong stuff.
I'd love to actually dig into this a bit more, to meet one of the guys who authorize those videos and see how they see it and what they're using it for. How are they, what to them is ROI, but that's not a question for today. I'll come back to that.
Yeah, I'm speculating. I mean, I've spoken to a couple, which inform that opinion, right? That it's, maybe it is driving the brand, maybe it isn't, but it's something that I believe in. And I think there is a real strength. You can argue the weaknesses as well, but there is a strength in some of the big Thai companies, which are very family owned, family run, very entrepreneurial, but also they have a strong value system. And this is, they believe in actually trying to propagate that in society. And that's a good thing.
I think Thailand would be better off if the people who make the adverts also made the TV shows, because the adverts have much higher production values, I think. A better messaging too.
Am I going dark in here, mate?
You've got a bit of a glare.
You can see me?
Bit of a glare on
Okay.
you, yeah.
Right.
So I'll try and wrap this up now a little bit. But
Sure.
obviously we're in June. There's been multiple stages of COVID. March was panic stations. April was lockdown. May was extended lockdown. And June starting to loosen up a bit.
Sure.
For me, working from home was a new experience. I didn't like it initially. Still prefer the office, but I've grown into it.
Yep.
For you, what have been the 3 essentials that you've needed while working at home? These could be 6 p.m. gin and tonic, or they could be daily exercise or Zoom calls, whatever it is.
Look, I think the important thing for me is that marketing and creative agencies are about collaboration. That's the kind of reflex, that's our main muscle, right? How we work together and collaborate. So initially it's really a big challenge. Because in an environment a creative environment where there's lots of people around, it's often the informal meetings that you have walking by a desk or sitting in a room that actually really generate ideas.
Sure.
That becomes hard to create in a more formalized Zoom meeting session where everyone's there and you don't have the physical cues that you would do in that environment. It's the same with pitching, or I helped out on a pitch recently, and if you're giving them something that they want and they know that they want, fantastic. If you're trying to take someone somewhere else, it's really, really hard. So how to actually use these tools to try and collaborate on the one hand, they're really quick and things can happen faster and decisions can be made faster, but actually moving the goalposts in terms of changing perception, changing thinking and creating becomes more of a challenge. And I don't have all the answers on that. Part of it is that smaller meetings, not bigger ones online, become more productive. 2 or 3 as opposed to 6 or 8. So I think it's more work, to be honest. I think it's more work having those interactions, because you can't, apart from the creative teams who often go away and come up with ideas and then come back and share them and then we play with them. It's a little bit more work having more interactions with different people to get the full value out of what you need. Okay, in terms of internal management. I'm someone who likes to write and learn, and I find that I can get a hell of a lot of that learning done now more than I could before. So I think that's a huge gain. Particularly if you divide your day up into admin, meeting, and creative time. Then that's nice. I find that creative time enormously productive.
Morning or afternoon for you?
Morning is better for me.
Mm.
I'm fresh and I'll wake up, get it early and sort of get it out there. It's a bit crap when I look at it later in the day, but that's okay. But you know what I mean? The collaboration side is where the challenge is.
Mm.
The other stuff is probably more productive. That's less productive, but because sometimes you have to do it differently. So learning how to use the tools. Also, you know, I've started this university lecture series, and how you lecture online, and how can you use Zoom, but can you write on the whiteboard, and how you actually bring that to life, as opposed to making it a boring online lecture, is also a really interesting challenge.
But have you?
How about you?
Oh, for me, working from home, the essentials. I had to get all new furniture. That's one of the essentials. Because prior to COVID, I was rarely home. I'd lived in the same house a couple of years, but I would work till late, come home, sleep, and then go away the weekend. So I didn't really.
Sure.
I live alone, so
Yes.
it's very much a bachelor house. So I
Sure.
didn't really think about comfort that much. But as soon as I had to work from home, I didn't even
Yes.
have a good desk. I didn't have a chair to sit on. So I'd always been someone that worked at the office, so I had to get all new stuff, which that's been an essential. I think going to the office is actually an essential for me too, because as you know, we recently moved office just at the start of the year, and it's got this great view of the city. Sitting at my desk, I'm inspired by the potential. But I live in a townhouse, so the view is out of my window, someone's wall. So it's hard for me to get the creative juices flowing when I'm looking at a wall. So I think that's another one. And the
I'm with you.
third has been trying to not order food online so much, because it's very tempting. Try and get to the fresh market as often as possible.
I'm looking forward to going back in an office space. How that looks, you know, having to get rid of my tracksuit pants and actually wear proper pants again is going to be interesting. But I'm looking forward to I mean, you know, we like to think that I'm trying to create a human-centric brand as well. So interaction with people becomes important. But how we manage that moving forward, how we collaborate and work together and keep it safe, that's our challenge moving forward.
I think we're pretty much done with this now, but I want to have a prologue here
Sure.
on a different topic. Have you ever heard of Larry Persons?
Persons?
Larry Persons, yeah. I'm reading his book at the moment, and I think I'm going to do a podcast with him next week. It's a fascinating book. I'll get you a copy.
Sure.
It's about Thai leadership. And as I'm reading it, it's blowing my mind. You know, there's so many things that I hadn't thought about, the nuances of management in Thai. But it got me thinking along kind of the lines of, initially everyone was talking about work from home. But the team that I manage, the feedback I'm getting is that work from home is not really what they want to do. For Thai people, not to generalize too much, but we're obviously from Western countries, we're driven by individualism and you know, this is my space, I'm doing my own thing. But Thai is a communal society. So you mentioned about the ideas coming from riffing and interacting. I think the Thai staff feel that more acutely than we do, even, because just like me at my house, it's not designed for working in. It's not set up that way. So often people will have their parents or their cats or a small room to work in. So I'm not sure if it is only localized to Thailand, that experience that people prefer the office, or if it is a global thing. My guess is that it's more here than in the UK would be, in terms of wanting to get out there, wanting to be part of the conversation, sit at a desk with other people and have that chit chat that makes up so much of the office.
I know what you're saying, and I seriously think that in Thailand there is very much that working together, being part of the team, that really is a motivation for working and creating the right environment where that's fun and enjoyable. But I have to say, you know, Dave, I got into advertising way too long ago, 25 odd years ago. And to work in a place full of creative minded people was so exciting to come into every day.
Mm.
And that was the thrill, and that was the fun, and the social, and going out for a drink afterwards, and eating together and doing all those things.
Yeah.
That is the work experience. I see so much talk again around working from home, and it's going to recreate. That isn't the industry in which I've, you know, worked or operated, and I don't think that's necessarily the place that great brand ideas and creative ideas are going to come from moving forward. I think we're going to have to divide it and work out what we can and what we can't do.
Yeah, I guess for an accountant would enjoy being at home with an Excel spreadsheet, because it's a different part of the brain that's being used, and you need focus and you need to be alone for that. But as you said, a great brand idea is possibly the result of 6 beers at a table with pizzas,
absolutely,
sitting up all night.
Yeah. We live in relation to others, and this has really changed and challenged how that works.
All right. Well, I'm going to get you a copy of that book because it's a good read.
Love to, mate. Love to. Good to speak to you.
Thanks for your time today, Rob.
Yeah, no problem.
Mate, stay on the line. I want to have a chat to you about something else after this.
No worries, mate.
Cheers, mate.
Stay up. Bye.